Welcome everybody. My name is Luis Giraldo, Chief Experience Officer here at ScalePad. And today I have a wonderful guest, Ryan Sigouin, who's our VP of Mergers and Acquisitions, but also a 21-year veteran of the MSP industry. Ryan, welcome. Thanks so much for hanging out with me here for a bit.
Thanks.
So I asked a favor the other day of you. We host this weekly call with the Lifecycle Insights crew. Right. And I was going to be traveling, and hey, can you cover this for me? And we sort of threw some
with lots of notice.
Yeah, well, that's my specialty, of course. And we threw a couple of topic ideas around, and of course, M&A being the thing that you've been doing not only at ScalePad, but also a key component of your role previously at F12. I thought, why don't you do a little talk track on M&A? And I went back to listen to the recording. And you kind of positioned the talk track a little bit from the things nobody tells you as a small MSP owner that you're going to find out one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I love that because there are so many golden nuggets in there. And so I thought maybe today we would literally go through these 8 things, your thoughts on some of these things. But to get us started, you've done dozens of acquisitions at this stage. Tell me a little bit about your history there.
So obviously after 21 years in the MSP space, what we found, and as I was trying to grow the business, is it's not easy to do it through sales. As a sales organization, my original company, which was level 4, I think that was probably one of the things we struggled with the most. And then I found this magical unicorn called M&A and figured that would be a really great way for us to grow the business. And so got really into it, got really excited by the idea of it. All of the mechanisms associated with operations and the finance piece, all of those things were just kind of the next level of running a small business. And so just got really, really into it. There's lots of opportunity. Go back 10 years ago, no one was really talking about M&A within the space. Even for me, the first time we got a phone call from a broker, I didn't even know there was value in the organization other than what you could kind of pull out in dividends and salary. So, yeah.
Right. Well, it seems like every conference nowadays has a M&A talk track as well. And so it's clearly a topic that people have been asking to hear about. Yeah. But again, the advice is always from the perspective of the PE firms or the acquirers. And I feel like a lot of nuance is lost about am I even ready for this as an MSP, right?
Well, it seems like everybody that's been through the process ends up going through the process, right? And so they end up being a part of an organization that's acquired people already. And then they're out there trying to find additional acquisitions. Trying to find targets isn't easy. And then when you do get a target, you want to try and maximize the value of what you're pulling from that target. So there's a few things that definitely over the years of dealing with people that have sold their business and selling my business myself, you definitely pick up on kind of a couple of the tips and tricks, I guess that you could say, that the private equity guys use and MSPs that have kind of created a strategy around acquisition.
Yeah. So let's jump into these. The first one that you had on your list was to educate yourself.
Yeah.
And this is maybe a rabbit hole within itself, but tell me a little bit about some of the key items that I think are critical to go into, not, with the wool over your eyes.
Yeah. So first time we started getting phone calls from brokers, you're hearing all these terms and it's working capital. And you're sitting there on your machine, Googling while you're on the phone call, trying to, I totally know what that means. So there's just a few things like that, all of the terms that get brought up in those conversations. I really wish that I would have understood them going into those initial conversations. And if you read anything online around the stages of integration or the stages of due diligence or anything like that, all of these things come up, working capital calculations, all the things around even normalizations, all of those terms that you're going to find on any sort of synopsis of a merger acquisition description are things that you should probably understand.
Now, I think the MSP industry is notorious for having a lot of technical owner operators who got into it for the technology aspect of it. They just love the tech, and perhaps business is not a strong suit. I think, you end up having to figure a couple things out along the way. But I think this the same reason is why there seems to be pushback from MSPs in whether they want to sell their company or not. And it's almost like, like you're selling your soul to the devil to agree that you want to sell your company or that you're building a business for sale. I wonder if there's sort of a mindset, quicksand there that is maybe causing some troubles.
I think that the hard part is like a lot of the guys that started in this industry did it for a reason. Like a lot of them really like serving the client. And I think when you're a smaller MSP and you're looking at larger MSPs and you're like, oh, well, those guys are doing like 50 million in revenue and I'm doing 1 million in revenue. Like, well, they're not as like personal as I am, or like there's always that kind of justification that you put in your head. Well, I'm not there because of this. And so I think you kind of start to paint a picture around what it feels like to be in a large MSP. And for the most part, like, I don't know if it's completely wrong either. Like there are lots of people that are kind of growing by acquisition and like when funding gets involved, things do change. But there are a lot of companies that don't and do it properly as well. So it's just really making sure that you're like, if you align yourself with the right company, it's not a problem. But I mean, those fears are justified.
Sure. I think, there's a little bit of the pride of building your own business and, their emotional connection to the business itself, even to the clients. I feel like, letting go is actually a big emotional, juncture during the process of selling.
Well, you think about like when you start the business from scratch. I didn't start my business from scratch. I came into a business and ended up buying it, but it was essentially like we were in an MSP when I got in there. So you remember signing your first MSP contract, and a lot of those clients are the ones that you really hold on to, and you're like grateful to them for helping you kind of on the road to start your business, and they become personal friends, and you just don't want to see those relationships that you worked like 15 years on to like, you feel personally responsible for them, and you don't want to see that kind of go the way that you're fearful that it will.
Now, one of the things I noticed as MSP aggregators or people or MSPs that are very acquisitive, or even PE firms, after they've done it a few times, they kind of, templates their process a bit. And so even when they go out searching for MSPs to acquire, they're kind of presenting it in a little bit of a kind of neatly wrapped package. This is how we do it. This is how we value your business. And I think it maybe puts a lot of MSPs in that situation of like, well, I'm not sure I like that way. And they kind of just walk away from it. But it seems like everything is a movable part in that equation, of course.
Well, that's the thing. Like everybody's going to have a way that they're going to present it, but there's a lot of bargaining chips that you have. Like I think one of the items on my list is the deal structure, right? So understanding that there's variables within deal structure, and then using the variables within a deal structure to kind of feel out where the fences are. So, well, what if I took a larger component of equity? How would that adjust my kind of like my evaluation? Or what if I had a larger earnout? And you can use those levers, I guess, to kind of feel out, well, what's their top value really? And what's their low ball really? And then after you kind of get a feel for what those fences are, kind of, well, create a structure that you feel comfortable with, knowing that those are their fences. Because usually they'll kind of give you a little bit more information when you start talking about deal structure changes.
Another item I think that is easily missed, I think, or an opportunity that may not get discussed unless the acquirer is proactively talking about it, is the opportunity to roll over some of your equity into the new business, seeking that the second bite of the proverbial apple. Is that always a bargaining chip in your experience?
I think that's like, from what I've seen, that's pretty common in terms of structure. So a lot of the guys that are out there, like the companies that are out there buying right now, want to make sure that there's either some sort of earnout or you're transferring equity into the business so they don't have to put out so much cash. So they don't use up their war chest as quickly as they could if they were just doing all cash deals. Again, like you're probably going to see a lower multiple on an all cash deal because there's more risk associated with you not being kind of tied into the business. And when you start to see larger components of equity transfer from your business into the other business, one of the mistakes that I think people make is not doing a proper due diligence on valuing the business that they're going into.
I see.
So it's like, well, you're paying me blank for my business. how do I evaluate how much your business is worth? And how do I make sure that the equity transfer is actually, and so I think a lot of private equities and more mature buyers use that as a way to kind of hedge the value of your business as well. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So you're not going to feel like you have the opportunity to do proper due diligence on the company that's buying you. So the things that you want to watch for are making sure that at least they have like their financial statements are audited instead of just a notice to reader. Like that would be a basic one. But I think actually getting someone to look at their financials, looking at 3 years trailing financials and all of those are things you should be asking for as you go through that process.
Yeah. I'll be honest though, I don't think I've met a sub $3 million business that had audited financials.
That's the thing, right? Yeah. So, but the person buying you should have audited financials. And if they don't, then you should really be doing a different degree of due diligence on them, especially if you're transferring equity. If they're paying you cash, like, oh, well, who cares, right? That's not your problem. But if you're going to be taking shares in that business and you're supposed to be trading them kind of dollar for dollar, you should know that you're getting kind of the right price.
Now, I feel like there are items that perhaps are maybe felt as taboo to ask in a situation like that, like the MSP that's being acquired. Maybe they're afraid or scared to ask the acquirer for their audited financials because it feels like it's out of place in that transaction. But I suspect that that's expected to some extent.
Oh, it would absolutely be expected. I think you're kind of playing your cards if you don't ask for those things. So there's a certain items that I think you would kind of show up as show yourself as a more mature seller if you knew what to ask a buyer for. And so getting a list of that prepared and knowing what you want and coming into the conversation early with that. So before you go to LOI, so letter of intent, is to make sure that you're setting expectations about the things that you're going to expect from the buyer.
At that juncture. Yeah. That's awesome. Now, one of the other items that you talk about in your list is, and this is such an overused word, of course, it's understanding the value of synergies.
Right.
And I think there's maybe a negative connotation to this word.
Yeah, well, it means layoffs, right? It's like what people typically associate it with.
Well, but tell me about the non-layoff synergies, because I think there are many opportunities to
absolutely
find.
Layoff synergies are actually not really great synergies in an MSP because one of the biggest values that you have are the people that are delivering the support, right? So typically you're not going to see a lot of synergies in the people running the business. What you will find synergies in are costs associated with some of the tools that we use. So if you look at things like antivirus, RMM, like if you're a really, really big player, you're getting some pretty deep discounts on those tools. I don't think people realize how deep those discounts get. So if I'm buying an MSP and I'm ripping out all of their tool stack and I'm replacing it with mine, there's going to be a substantial cost savings there. Things like data center, like Microsoft licensing, all of those, like there's a lot of money that gets saved when you buy a business that's paying not necessarily full pop, but close to full pop for those things, and you bring them into a larger MSP. Yeah. So the big thing there is understanding where they're going to find that value in your business so that you can kind of get a picture of how they're valuing the entire business. So when you're on the buyer side, you're always like, well, those are my synergies because I've built the scale in order to capture those savings, but like I say, they're being calculated in the value. And so if you understand them, you can kind of use that to help your negotiation.
Well, and I think the other aspect of this is that I see a lot of MSPs who, when I was getting ready to sell my business, I found I was getting weekly emails from interested parties. And in the very beginning, I took on the attitude is I just want to have the conversations, learn as much as I can about the process. And I felt that some of the early conversations, even though they were not a fit, helped me understand a ton of like what people are looking for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had so many conversations like before we even went to an LOI with someone. It was like, anybody that wanted to talk to me about it, I was willing to do it. I think people kind of get into this like, oh, well, I'm going to waste someone's time. Like those guys are out constantly searching for MSPs to buy. They don't care if you're not wasting their time. They're building a relationship. And they want to know where everybody's at and who's buying and why people are selling. So don't be afraid to just talk to everybody that's interested in talking to you about your business. Make sure that you have kind of your talk track prepared. Make sure you have things like, that they're going to be asking for certain things,
right.
but you'll figure those out as you go through those conversations. Just definitely, I wouldn't recommend doing a deal with the first person that talks to you.
Well, I think that could also be, I think the most common transaction most people are familiar with is perhaps real estate transactions.
Yeah.
And you always seem to get the advice of like, this might be your only offer.
Right.
You should take it. But I think you have to be ready for it, and you have to have been having those conversations.
Yeah.
And every one of them conversations, I felt like it gave me a little bit of an extra edge to ask more, better questions and all that stuff.
Well, the irony of that is that a business that everybody else wants to buy is a business it's a good business. And so if you run a really strong business that has strong EBITDA and all the kind of good fundamentals, then you don't feel like you need to unload it because it's doing well for you, right? And those are the businesses that are going to generate the highest multiple on EBITDA.
Yeah. Now, an MSP being acquired perhaps has never gone through this before, and so they're not necessarily aware of what is to follow after a deal, is signed on the dotted line. I guess the integration component of that, whether it's operational or support or all the different pieces. And I guess this is where you spent a lot of your battlefield days is actually integrating some of your acquisitions into the larger business. Tell me a bit about
still doing it on the SaaS side now.
Way more fun, right?
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about the process, the things sort of not to forget to think about in thinking about an integration plan.
Well, not just kind of figure it out later is a lot of the tone that you typically get when you're in those conversations. It's like, well, let's get the deal done. And then after the deal's done, we can start figuring out together what our integration plan is going to be. And it'll be us working together to figure out how we navigate this. The reality is that they should really have an integration plan. They should ideally have some experience going through that before. But the big thing is that they should have someone devoted to working with you through all the acquisitions that I was involved in. It's like a pretty emotional ride for the person selling the business. And if you don't have kind of someone there to support you through that's kind of your liaison into the business, it's really, really hard. I've definitely been in that position. And you have to really work harder than you maybe want to navigate through that business to find kind of where the resources are or who should I be talking to about this. So you want to make sure that they have a person that's going to be dedicated to being your liaison through that process. Yeah.
And I feel that could make or break the experience post-acquisition.
Absolutely
and becomes a calling card for the acquirer in a way as well, because I think we become, as the acquirees, we become a referral source for future businesses that they want to buy.
The best possible referral source.
Yeah. What was the experience like? How did that work? And so, super important. I think also, but for your own team as the MSP that's being acquired, you want to be able to give your entire team the transparency of a process that seems to be well managed. And I think that changes a bit of the perception.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the amount of effort that it's going to take to walk your team through that process. And so if you're finding it really challenging to pull your business into another business, then your team's not going to get that attention from you. And you really need to be there for your team as they go through that.
Love that. All right. Item number 4 on your list. And I think this is a big one, is to understand your exit options.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of a nebulous thing in the beginning, because again, a lot of folks are still going through the emotional battle of whether I even want to sell in the first place. But, and I think we forget to ask some of the options that exist, or even the creative exit options that exist.
And like when you're going through the kind of dating phase of a process like this, you want to make sure that you're coming across, you tend to want to make sure that you come across as someone that's really like, okay, we're going to do this together. And you want to, but I guess maybe at least the best way to put it is like, there's a reason that you ended up working for yourself at some point, and to remind yourself of that and understand what it's going to feel like to potentially become an employee again. And just understanding what your options are, if maybe that doesn't feel the way that that you want it to feel.
I will say, though, I think there is a spectrum of your own life experiences that evolves and changes. And you may have started your business at age 25 when you were a rebel and could not, picture yourself ever working for anybody.
Absolutely.
But I think when you're 45 or 50, suddenly, the dynamic and the landscape is changing dramatically in that respect.
Well, and you want to set things up so that you're not so dependent on yourself as well, right? There's a lot of comfort when you're walking your business into a larger organization and there's someone that does sales for me. There's someone that takes care of the finance. So you can kind of find a really clear lane for yourself, especially at the end of a career. Like that's a really nice feeling, to feel supported and also to feel like this isn't all on me. Mm-hmm. So just understand where you are in your journey and make sure that you understand how you're going to exit from the business if you decide to. Maybe you get into it for 3 years and the game changes a little bit in the business and you decide that it's not for you. Or maybe your life changes, something happens with your family or something changes and you want to just understand how to get out, or if you can get out, so that you're not trying to figure it out when you're kind of coming home from having a bad day. Right.
Well, the other aspect I think is, a lot of MSP owner operators are wearing so many hats in their small business. And, the average MSP is 7 people. A lot of MSPs that are over $1 million are getting, weekly letters with inquiries for acquisition and stuff like that. So I think the entire range of business maturity and size is sort of on the potential selling block here.
Yeah.
But I think one of the interesting things is that as people are going to make the transition into working for somebody else, their role is going to get a lot more narrow, I think, generally speaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you may not have sort of the freedom to roam as much as you've had in your existing business. Yeah. And so I guess the clarity of understanding what your role is going to be becomes fairly important.
Like what your role is going to be and what the expectations of that role are, so that you know. I think the breadth of the role will shrink, but the scale of it will probably increase. And so it's an adjustment, right? Mm. Like, especially if you're going from single location to multi-location, like multi-location is a completely different game than single location. Management, everything about that is just completely different. Like having offices that have different tones, and how do you manage cultures, and how do you manage consistency and process across multiple locations? Like depending on the role that you find yourself in, there's a massive learning curve to go into multi-location. So just little things like that understanding kind of what that feels like and what the expectations of you will be, and get a real clear definition. Again, this is similar to the integration, and like, we'll figure it out later. Like You probably don't want to be there kind of sitting in the gray area for a year while you kind of figure out later what you're gonna do when you grow up in that business.
No doubt. One of the other items on your list, and I love this one because I've had an affinity for the accounting side of the business over the years. But one of the things you recommend is get a great accountant. Yeah. And not just somebody who can do your taxes, of course. Yeah. But I think you really do need to speak to experts that understand tax law. What happened? Yeah. How would I get my business ready and myself personally ready to maximize tax treatment in the opportunity of selling the business? And so tell me a bit of the things that you think are sort of the clear things to watch out for.
Yeah. Well, like if you're listening to this, like first off, figure out what structure you should be owning your business under, and what the tax treatment is going to be around that. One of the things that I was like surprised by when I started going down this process is like, well, there are accountancy firms that are specifically set up just for tax treatment. And so reaching out to those people and understanding, okay, how should I be structuring my business if I plan on selling it in a year or 2 years or 5 years? What does that mean for my kids? How am I going to manage my capital gains in Canada, capital gains exemptions? And how is that going to transfer through? What if I have a hold co and that owns it? How dirty is my hold co? How much do I have to clean it up before I go through this transaction? All of those things are really, really important to understand. Also, what are normalizations? What are the likely normalizations that you would see in a transaction like this? Like an accountant will help you clean that up, because you don't want to go into a transaction with a bunch of kind of running everything through the business and having a lot of negotiation about
pulling things out.
Pulling things out, because the person that's acquiring your business will obviously side one way and you're going to side the other. So if you get rid of all of those things and you have an accountant that kind of helps you manage that process, then it just makes the entire negotiation later on so much easier.
Well, and going back to a bit of the expectations that you maybe discuss with an acquirer, I think even simple things like, you put your car lease inside of the company because that's what your accountant told you to do. Yeah. But it's the first thing that an acquirer wants to rip out of your deal, because nobody's doing that for anybody else in the company that is acquiring you, and this has to go. And suddenly that turns your whole world upside down because you have to unravel a whole tax situation there. So it does get messy. And I think back to the conversations that's so important to have, this allows you to early on in the process be set up to make the right decisions in the business. You mentioned, we're in Canada, and I was so grateful that I was having some of these conversations early, because I learned that Revenue Canada has tests that your companies go through, that determines whether or not you can access capital gains exemptions. Yeah. And now when you're selling $1 million business, $3 million business, it can be the difference between paying a $500K in tax or $1 million in tax, right? And so I think these things have reaching effects that it's worthwhile having the conversation and digging in.
Yeah, and I think about find a great accountant. Like there's lots of good accountants out there, but finding someone that's really, really strong, like they should be able to navigate that conversation very easily and not have to kind of go look things up. And you definitely don't want to be dealing with the person that's kind of doing their books out of their basement or something like that. So
now there's through the various M&A things that I've been involved with over the years, there's little expressions I think that are used commonly in this space of M&A deals. And one of my favorites is time is the enemy of all deals. Yeah. I find that, people are often in this interesting honeymoon phase. Everybody's excited. And if for whatever reason the deal slows down, it seems to always kill the deal. And one must not be afraid to walk away in those scenarios. Yeah. But I was curious to ask you if there's other little expressions like that are your favorites, that are kind of like, philosophical in themselves.
Yeah. A lot of it was about the owner of the business when we were going through those conversations. And so you'd be profiling someone and their people pretty deeply. And there was, terms that you would definitely use that
you're not going to say right here.
No, I think that's probably something we don't need to get into, but there, but it does speak to how you present yourself and how the people that work for you present themselves as well. And making sure that they understand the process that you're going through. Like there's some other really good podcasts about M&A that talk about how to prepare your people for it. We had at level 4, we had a really open kind of policy around that. So we were acquiring businesses. And so we were talking about acquisition. And so it became kind of part of the culture of the company. And so it wasn't kind of shocking to our people when we went through those processes. And the more open you can be with people early in the stage. So if you can have someone come into the business to do due diligence on you, and you don't have to kind of make up excuses about why they're there or tell everybody that they're accountants and all those things, it just makes that process so much easier.
Now, I get the sensation that, or the feeling that acquirers think of you as the acquiree or the person they're considering as either easy to work with or difficult to work with. Yeah. And I feel like, an acquirer will easily walk away from a deal where they think the owner is going to just be a pain in the butt to work with.
Yeah.
And you must have come across the occasional person.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, especially earlier on in kind of my acquisition career, when you were looking at like anything that you could get your hands on. Deal structure was really how that got dealt with. So full cash deal, then you didn't need to worry about that person kind of moving forward. Or, especially in a situation where someone's transferring equity, like you're essentially kind of going to be working with that person for a long period of time. You want to make sure that values are consistent, and not only from an acquirer standpoint. Like if you're being acquired, you want to make sure that the values of the business that you're going to find yourself in really align with where you're at. But yeah, like walking away from a deal, like I did it multiple times. I think it's just part of the process.
Yeah. And I think it just hardens a little bit of your own understanding of what to expect. And it just makes it easier to have the difficult conversations later on too.
Well, it's like, I don't know what you would kind of, becomes so emotional. It's like when you're buying a house, right? And you're going through that process with your spouse, and it just feels like if we don't get this house, like we'll never love another house ever again, right? And then like you just find like a week later, you find one that you love. It's the same thing with going through this process. Right. Like there are a lot of MSPs out there, like, and we're in Canada where the market is substantially smaller than it is in the US. Like there are hundreds of MSPs that are like really, really strong, on the acquisition side in the US. So there are lots of options.
Well, let me flip the perspective for a second. Thanks for that great segue, because I think a lot of MSPs that are, $1, $2, $3 million don't imagine that they are in a position to acquire another business. A, because maybe you don't keep a lot of cash in the business. That's, by the way, one of the tests that the CRA wants to make sure that you're not keeping too much passive, passive assets in the business, because you'll fail the test and you won't get access to capital gains. But, what are some of the, I guess, creative ways that you've seen a smaller MSP go out and acquire another business?
Well, I was tiny when we started acquiring businesses. There were lots of weird little creative things that we did at the early stages. So finding a business that wasn't going to move forward unless we did something, and then paying out a percentage of what we made. So basically like a commission for a period of a couple years to the owner. Vendor financing. So buying a business and then just paying the owner for the next 3 years, whatever their salary was, to just kind of walk away from the business. Having them kind of essentially lend you the money. So paying in like a set interest rate to that person and paying them off over a period of time. Like we played with all of that stuff and did deals with all three of those structures like early on in our career. The cool thing about buying businesses and doing a little bit of a roll up yourself before you get bought is that if you can show that you're able to go through that process, like you're going to gain a heck of a lot of knowledge about what it feels like to be on both sides. But there's a lot of value in businesses that understand how to buy other businesses and leaders that understand how to integrate businesses. So you want to talk about like increasing your multiple. That's a really good way to do it. It also creates a little bit of a tone around your business that you're a competitor to someone else that's doing M&A. Right. And so you kind of, I don't want to say fear, but like, we have an opportunity to take out someone that we might be competing with another business for. So all of those things, I think. But the one that I was kind of surprised by was how easy it is to find value. So if you can go out and you can buy a less mature MSP for maybe like at that time, it was like a 3x or a 5x of EBITDA. And then you can go ahead and sell like a year later for 7. Like there's a lot of value creation that happens in a very short period of time if you can do it well. And
like a house in an up market.
Yeah, exactly.
Just magical value creation
that gets created by just finding an extra 3 turns on a multiple just by simply ingesting that income. Well, there seems to be sort of, I guess, the deduction or understanding that a larger business definitely seems to carry a bigger, multiple or valuation just for the fact that it's a $5 million business instead of a $2.5 million business.
Let me ask you a question about the idea of a turnkey business, because I've always felt like to an acquirer, the idea that they can buy a business and not have to deal with the owner is in some extent more valuable than, have to deal with the owner and potentially carry, a non-regular, I guess, salary or cost to keep that owner on. Your thoughts on this idea of being a turnkey business?
They're out there. They're hard to find. It would be the best answer.
And by turnkey, I mean, the kind of business where the CEO could literally walk away and the business would continue running.
They're out there. Like I say, they're just very, very rare. The other thing that you find as you're growing through acquisition is that you don't give the business time to scale. So like when you're 5 people and you grow to 10, and you do it with the team that you're with, like everybody gets to learn through that process, right? So you know what it feels like when we were 5, you get to be 6 people, you get to be 7 people, you get 8, 9, 10. And so everybody gets to grow up through that process. And then if you go to 25 now, well, the people may learn how to run a 25-person business from a 10-person business. But when you just magically go out and add 15 more people to the business, now you're instantly running a business that has a completely different kind of management structure required. And it's really hard to find people that can just jump into a business like that. But you find them in owners a lot of the time. So a lot of business owners have the ability to kind of do those jumps and end up in kind of a management position fairly quickly that's able to kind of support that. So I think that a lot of the acquisition work that we did, it was like some of the biggest value that you got were the owners of those businesses coming into the business and helping you scale up to the next stage. So yeah, like if you're acquiring a business, don't underestimate kind of bringing that person forward. Always there's going to be challenges like they're going to have, everybody has ideas on how to run the business, but if you're really clear about that, and the more mature the businesses that you're selling to, the more their processes will hopefully be set and all those things. So it becomes easier to find your spot. But yeah, turnkey businesses would be great, but yeah, like I say, they're hard to find.
Unicorns.
Yeah.
Ryan, wow, this has been amazing. I love all the insight. To everybody listening, if you have questions, reach out to us through the ScalePad website or on LinkedIn. I'm always excited to have these conversations because I think there's always the benefit of the outsider perspective to give you advice or to tell you about our learnings. So don't be afraid to engage with us and have a conversation. Ryan, again, thank you so much for being here. And we'll see you all soon.
Yeah. Thanks.
Take care.